So I'd like to welcome to the episode Brigitt Thompson. Welcome.
Thanks, Luis. It's such an honor to be with you.
Yeah, you too. I think the first time I met you, I think was I did like an online circle. Is that right? Were you at one of those?
Yes, the
Right?
very first one was one of the online healing circles.
That's what I
Yeah,
thought. Yeah, I just remembered
yeah.
that. I remember
hmm
you had such a beautiful presence, and then I saw you in the course, and I thought, oh, this is nice. This person joined. This person followed along and wanted to go deeper. And then you were in the 6 week course, and then you wrote this incredible thing. For those of you listening, when we do the 6 week course, we use Slack, which is like this online workspace kind of chat room, and everyone shares their journey, their disasters, their beautiful moments. Everything gets shared there. And Bridget shared something there that I'm going to ask her to read in a little bit, that was so profound, and actually why I reached out for her to come on the podcast and talk about her experience. But before we do that, I just want to know a bit about you. Like, what's your story? I know it's a big question, but
It
how
is.
do you introduce yourself? Put it that way.
Well, I would say um, I'm a writer. I'm a seeker. I'm a maker of mistakes and a course corrector.
Mhm.
I'm the author of a book called Trust Yourself with Money, which I think is probably one of the most meaningful projects I've ever completed.
Wow, I didn't know that. Okay.
And yes, when I wrote the book, I had such a somatic reaction. I didn't have that language at the time. I do now.
Yeah.
So it's really interesting to kind of look back on so many different experiences in life through this new lens that I have available to me now. But I would also say that I'm really interested in freedom and personal agency and how we find it, how we look for it, how we create it, how we search for it in the context of all these obligations and limitations and systems that we're obliged to be a part of. And that's part of what I wrote about in my book.
Mm.
So that's how I'd introduce myself.
Oh, it's beautiful. Well, we're going to get to talking about all that. But before we do, let us hear this, beautiful reflection you wrote about this work and how it started
Yes.
integrating and shifting.
Okay, let me read the post. It starts out, hi friends, just sharing some reflections about this process that have been swirling around for me this week. Building capacity feels a lot like making room. I find that the more I do this work, the more spacious I feel internally. As I de-adrenalize my body, I'm beginning to feel more calm, grounded, and settled. As a result, I'm becoming more sensitive to moments of charge and activation. Slowly, I'm training myself to turn toward these sensations after a lifetime of pushing down or swatting away the uncomfortable feelings in my body. As I've shared in our circle, I've also been dealing with autoimmunity, Hashimoto's. The notion that my body is perfect and doing exactly what it should be doing in reaction to what's happening in and around it is a bit mind-bending. I love the idea conceptually, but I'm giving it time to truly land in my body and psyche. The other thing that's somewhat ironic is that I'm noticing that I'm unhooking from an addiction to adrenaline itself. In other words, I thought I was simply dealing with sugar cravings, but I'm noticing now that I have a habitual need, or maybe expectation is a better word, for discomfort and anxiety. For example, repeatedly checking emails, analytics, my devices, etc., is a way of looking for or creating hits of anxiety, moments of disappointment or fear or conflict. What I'm trying to express here, it's hard to put into words, is that the spaciousness and peace and groundedness that I'm starting to experience as a result of this work feels strange and unfamiliar, and at times uncomfortable. This is so interesting to me, not what I expected. Lately, I'm noticing a lot of activation in my legs, almost like a buzzing type of feeling. I ask, what do my legs want to do? But I'm still not sure what the answer is. I'm guessing it has to do with flight. That's what my poet's mind and common sense tell me. It's hard to remember that I'm not trying to solve a puzzle. I'm just learning to pay attention and be with all of it. Much love to you all, and thanks for listening.
I just love, I'm not trying to solve a puzzle,
Yeah,
right? I'm just trying to be with it.
yeah.
I wrote down as you were speaking, reading that, I wrote down moments that really hit me when I read it. And I think I'll kind of go in order and we can just, jive off it and see how it feels. The making room, like I love that you use that phrasing, right? Because I say building capacity, yet that is making room. So I want to know how you've experienced that making room.
It's it's so interesting because the work is so rich. Sometimes it's hard to find words to describe what's happening. And I guess that's the point, is that you're in the body. And
That's right.
I'm, probably like a lot of people who are attracted to this work, a very intellectual, heady person, very head-centered person. So to be in the body is new. And then to try to find words to express it feels so important, because words are important to me. Ultimately, I don't know how important it is, but it feels important. So making room is what it feels like to me. It's almost like when I started to do some of the exercises that you share in the course, um, I noticed that I was kind of coming up against a kind of emptiness,
Hmm.
a kind of spaciousness, not emptiness in a negative sense, but like almost like more space, more room. And it was so unfamiliar that it took a while for me to realize that, because I wasn't comfortable with it, I was then trying to fill the space back up with
Hmm.
stimulation and, checking emails and doing all
Hmm.
these things to feel busy again, to feel overworked again, because the charge was what was comfortable and what was familiar. And that blew my mind, which is why I went and shared on Slack for the first time, because I was pretty quiet as a member of the class and a member of the group before then. But I thought, wow, this is interesting. And so that's kind of how it felt in my body, in my spirit, in myself. Like I'm creating space here. I'm creating space by noticing what I'm experiencing. That was the very beginning of
Hmm.
starting to kind of put words to it and understand it.
What I love about hearing that experience for you is when you say, when I was doing the exercises and I was meeting this space, I was coming up against a space in me and I was new. There's this, I talk about this a lot, but not in the way of space. Is why I love your words here about there's this overcoupling with the physiology of constriction being really safe. We overcouple constriction as safe when we develop with trauma, especially socially or culturally, because the body is consistently just naturally in a bracing posture or gesture, whether it's obvious like the shoulders and fists, or it's even the viscera like your lungs and your abs and your gut, right? So that constant squeezing, the body starts to think, well, I'm still alive. So this long-term constriction is why I have survived. So letting go of that constriction will literally equal my death. I mean, it goes that dramatic bodily. Where is that for you with this? Like the more you learn how to feel safe in this space, what's that like for you? I'm curious.
Um, it's something I've been trying to give words to and to talk about with my friends and my people that I share my journey with, because it's so remarkable. There's a way that all constriction now feels like the same thing. So it's almost like, first we talked about nutrition, and I had already been on a nutritional journey before coming in contact with you and your work and doing this work with you. I had already identified that I had an autoimmune problem. I had already given up, Snickers bars, and I had already done so much work before getting here. So I thought, what? I have to give up my dried mangoes? That's the last thing I have.
No.
It was like, no way. So the first 6 weeks, I was like just ignoring the nutritional advice. I was like, I can't do that yet. But what I found was, when I was ready to release the excess sugar in my diet, even though it wasn't that much, it was still excess sugar. I started feeling that difference that I just read the post about. And then what happened after that was, when I started allowing the silence and the emptiness and the spaciousness to be, I started seeing clicks and connections between all the areas of my life: the physical, the emotional, worry thoughts, physical pain. It was all constriction. How I felt about money, waiting for receivables, wanting new projects, worrying about the future, worrying about the past. It was all constriction. And I began to realize that I was taking part in this experience. It wasn't just happening to me. It wasn't just happening from the outside. And that was, it was another level of awareness that was so humbling. It was so humbling. And so that's when I started feeling like, okay, there's something here about being with it all, being with the spaciousness, being with the constriction. And I don't know, does that answer that question? It all kind of melded into one thing, all the different experiences of relaxation and constriction. So, for example, if I'm cutting onions in the kitchen and I feel that feeling of the tears coming, that burning feeling, now I have a little practice where, instead of bracing and flinching, I relax. And I'm with it. It's like a little weight that I'm lifting, like, oh, I'm going to do my practice now. And I let the feeling of the burning sensation in my eyes, I just let it be. And then, of course, magically, it just relaxes and releases so much faster than the old days where I used to cut, onions, and I'm opening the windows and turning on the exhaust fan and weeping and, wiping my eyes, and my eyes are getting all puffy. Now it's just like going through. And I think that's such a beautiful metaphor for how it all moves through. And it's so early in the process for me. I'm just starting this work, but it's just so humbling and so magical, because everything is like that. So if I'm feeling a kind of bracing feeling because I'm nervous about having a conversation, it's just like cutting the onions. And if I'm feeling a pain in my body that I've been struggling with, it's the same thing. I feel it instead of bracing against it, pushing it down. And something happens in that process of just being with it. And I'm still just completely blown away by it.
I'm blown away by you, because first of all, you're the first student I've ever interviewed, because and I don't know why that is. Well, I guess I know why, because when I read that, that paragraph you wrote, there was a sense as I was reading it of, this person is like living and breathing these practices. And it doesn't mean no one else has, but I just hadn't heard anyone say it the way you did. And what you just said was, what validates that for me was, you're cutting the onions and you're noticing this moment of cutting the onions and how my body braces against the sensation in my eyes is the same brace against a person I'm afraid to talk to, is the same brace about a memory, a painful memory that comes up. that's the piece I'm always trying to find words for when I'm sharing this work, is getting rid of the duality of good or bad and just going to the sensation of, am I constricted or am I expanded? Like, it's that simple. And you're saying it so beautifully that all these different elements, they come back to a constricted state regardless of what they are, or they come back to an expanded state. It's one or the other. And even people that feel numb, those of you listening to this and think, well, I don't feel anything, that's a defense mechanism against constriction and activation. So that's actually a sense of constriction when you feel numb. So it's always constriction or expansion. And the onions, I mean, I would even go as far as to say that practice of cutting the onions and opening up into the sensation of the weepy, burny feeling, it's like preparing you for death someday, right? Like literally. I mean, do you agree?
Yes, it's really interesting because I just last night I just finished the last three chapters of The Untethered Soul.
I never
And
read that one fully. I have to.
I love Michael Singer so much, and there's a real resonance with this work, with the stuff that he talks about. But there was one chapter about contemplating death, and it was so beautiful. And he was talking about how if you recognize it for what it is, death is something that elevates your experience of life. Thinking about death, if this were the last week of my life, that whole thing, what does that do for you when you think that this could be the last day of my life? It reconnects you with your life when you think about the fact that you might not live. And it's beautiful when you really think about it, if you're open to it, if you're
That's
really
right.
open to it, to really feeling this moment. That's what I've found so interesting. And I've really been curious because I don't know a lot about somatic experiencing except through my work with you. But it has such a resonance with these kinds of Buddhist ideas and emptiness and mindfulness and all of those things. I wonder about, and I know Peter Levine's name because my brother is a psychology professor. And so I remember hearing about him before. But I'm so curious about the parallels between this work and all of that very old tradition,
As
of yoga and all that.
as you say that, when you say yoga and Buddhism, and I would even say a lot of like indigenous practices, the thread for me, and those are actually indigenous practices, yoga. The thread, as I think of all that, what connects them is this practice of witnessing versus identifying, right? And I think that's the big one. Somatic experiencing doesn't talk about it as much as I expect them to. But what I gathered from it and from practicing and teaching it is exactly that we're learning how to see the body as a sovereign being, not identify with it. And when we're living from our mind most of our lives, we're literally living without a body, right? So we're not really relating or identifying or noticing. We're not really anywhere with it. Or if we're really in our bodies and we think we're our bodies. So if like I always use the example of like if I have a rash and I'm identifying with having the rash, I had rashes for years, and I'm identifying with having like this skin disorder, let's say. I'm so identified with the body that I'm not witnessing it. I feel like I am it. I am that rash. I am the shame. Whatever it comes from it. But I find with this work and just with yoga and Buddhism, there is this separation, healthy separation, where you're tending the body and you're nurturing and listening and relating with the body compared to being fully identified with it or in avoidance of it. And I wonder how you experience that, if that makes sense or not.
It does. And I think this is where I am now. I've been noticing when I leave my body. I've been noticing that more. I've been noticing when I leave my body because I have a certain thought, I have a certain feeling, something happens, and I've been taking a little kind of casual inventory of what I do to leave my body and what happens when I leave my body. And then I started just shifting back into the body. And so I don't know.
No,
I
right there.
guess
I mean, I would say right there, your ability to even say that, like to say, I notice when I leave my body speaks to this reality that, first of all, you're not your body. And there's something in you that's able to witness the sensation of leaving it, and then the sensation of when I'm with it. And I want to know what that is for you. Like what tells you that? How does it feel to be with it compared to being without it?
it's very hard to describe, Luis.
I know.
But I guess hmm, I guess I'll say this, and I don't know if this is going to be clear enough, but I'll just say that what I'm so amazed by is the both the power and the simplicity of this work. I do know when I'm feeling something in my body if I can just quiet down long enough to check in. Is the body a separate entity? We've been talking a lot about the kind of animistic view of the body. I'm still wrapping my head around that. That is a little bit, beyond what I'm used to thinking about, although it makes perfect sense to me logically, but it's still kind of like, what does that mean?
Hmm.
Is this is this like a pet, an animal? Like, what is this? I don't even know what to do with that idea yet.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
So, but I am aware of, which is again going back to what I mentioned about Michael Singer. He talks about the fact that you think that you're your mind, but whoever you are, the soul or whoever you are, is actually observing the thoughts in your mind. If you're able to observe it, then it can't be you. You're not one with it.
Yes. Yes.
And
That's exactly right.
that's why this work is so resonant with that to me. And I guess that's where I am with that. It's understanding that I can always come back to the body. I can always come back to my sensations. I can always create safety by doing that. And I didn't know that. I've done so many different practices and modalities in my life, always searching, 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 therapy and coaching and EFT and on and on and on. So many things. And so many of them were wonderful and helpful and transformational in many ways. But there's something about the work that I'm doing with you and our group that seems to click everything else together, that seems to kind of infuse everything else with a kind of energy.
Mm.
And it also is creating this kind of integration of all of those things.
Mm.
I can't even really say more than that. It's been amazing. And as a writer, I've just noticed, because I write professionally for corporate clients, but I also do my own writing. And I've been writing so much. It's like being in this space has unlocked a kind of energy store. And I don't really know what else to say about the body as a separate entity, because I'm still making sense of that and thinking about it.
Yeah. I mean, when you say I'm not my thoughts because I'm able to notice them,
Yeah.
what I find so interesting about this work is we start to notice how to embody a trauma response, which is something reflexive. And that's what's to me so far out about this work is we are literally noticing what it feels like to feel the body doing its own thing without our choosing, right? And I think the most relatable reflex, I always use this example, is sneezing. Almost every human can say, I know what it feels like when there's a sneeze coming on, right? And it's coming, and in your mind, you're like, oh no, please don't sneeze. Like I'm in front of people, whatever the situation is. But that sneeze comes. And there's something, when you said humbling earlier, there's something humbling in thinking, what if there was more than just sneezing that was reflexive? What if it was the food I eat? What if it's the relationships I'm in? What if it's the words that come out of my mouth? What if so much of my being is in this autopilot from survival responses being so chronically turned on that I'm actually not even choosing most of these things, right? And I'm identified with it. So I think it's me. So I call it self-sabotage, or I say I have a bad habit. We have these words for it. But when we're doing this somatic practice, we're starting to be the witnesser of these reflexes, just like the reflex to leave the body, and you're witnessing leaving the body. So it's from that place, that reflexive place that I'm witnessing in me, where I draw that conclusion. I should say open conclusion, because I'm always open to something that could be wrong or greater or take me somewhere else, around this body being a sovereign being. Because a sovereign being, it is reflexive. It knows how to survive. It takes care of itself. We digest food ourselves in our bodies. We grow hair without having to ask our bodies to grow hair. There's so much it does that's completely innate, right? And so I see these trauma responses coming from that deep place that's also inherent in the body that has nothing to do with us. And, you know, I'm kind of taking us somewhere based on what you wrote in your paragraph you read around training to turn toward the unpleasant sensations. Because what you'd said right there, training to turn toward instead of turning away or turning toward coping, that's where I get to this conclusion essentially with the sovereign being. But that's what makes this work so different than the other modalities you talked about. I don't know any other modality that says like go into the fire and find safety there, right? And so I'm curious for you, like what has it been like to first be able to embody the charge of threat and then train yourself to say, I'm allowed to go toward that. I don't have to brace and run away from or avoid that. Like how has that impacted you, or how has that changed things?
Hmm. Where do I even begin with that?
Wherever it takes you. Yeah.
Um, well, what I was thinking while you were talking was I'm learning to honor my body. And so I'm learning to trust my body. So trying to dominate, push down, run away from, brace, flinch is like, you don't know what you're doing, body.
Mm-hmm.
I don't trust you. I've seen this movie before. I'm out of here. I'm leaving. I'm leaving my body.
Yep.
And that was safety in my mind. It wasn't a sustainable form of safety, and it wasn't an enriching or empowering source of safety, but it was something. It was what I knew. When I started to approach that kind of spacious, open darkness, that emptiness, that spaciousness that I was trying to describe, at first it was a little scary because I wasn't sure what was in there. But what I learned was that going toward that emptiness and that spaciousness was how I would move these sensations and charges and experiences through my body and make room for the next thing.
Mm.
And so this
So
sounds
I would
so vague and poetic. I'm like, why can't I say this
no, I
differently?
think it is vague and poetic. I think one reason, one reason I do so many online intro circles to this work is so people can feel it, because like we're trying to describe something as tactile, and it's like we're doing our best. not doing a bad job, but it's like you can't fully get it unless you feel it, and then it's like, okay, I get how this works now. And like when you say, you know you give it space to move, or it moves and then there's space for the next thing.
Yeah.
Like if we all visualize a body and we think of stress as like boiling water, If we're bracing against that boiling water, it's losing its space, right? It's the boiling water just keeps moving up. We get more compressed. When we go into the boiling water and we realize, oh, it's actually not boiling water, it just feels like boiling water, then we relax around it, right? And that charge that I'm calling boiling water, it metabolizes into those relaxed tissues. It literally, like a sponge, it gets it soaked up. And then in that soaking up, the body has more capacity and space. So then when something stressful happens, there's all this space and capacity to experience it. We don't feel compressed and pushed over the edge. We get more resilience. And I wonder, like, with a body, as you're experiencing this yourself and the body having more resilience and more space, how does it feel? Like, one of the controversies with the word safety is that you can't ever promise safety, right? Because I can't tell you you're going to walk out your door and there's safety. That's more like an affirmation. However, what I've found with this work is I've found such a safety in my bones that I'm always kind of wrapped up in that. So regardless of what I'm seeing or experiencing out in the world, I'm noticing, well, there's this inner safety I can connect to. How do you experience that experience of safety? What's that like for you as you move through the world?
I think that's something that's just beginning to emerge in my experience. A sense that I've always known intellectually, I can't control other people. I can't control the weather. I can't control anything really that happens in the outside world. And yet there's a part of me that really wants to, because I think if I could, life would be so much better. And I've been thinking about this for decades now. So I would say that one of the reasons why I love this work so much is that it's giving me an opportunity to actually have an experiential kind of relationship with this idea. I know I can't control you or my next door neighbor or anyone, my family, my clients. I can't control anyone. And I already know that. But yet there's this, back to that addiction to adrenaline, there's this really strong pull toward righteous indignation and repeating stories of wrongdoing and
Oh,
things that
yeah.
happen to me. I mean, it's like, it's so, oh, it's just like, I just want to do that. I want everyone to understand that should not have happened. And if you
Hmm.
could just have done it differently, I would be so much better off. Now with this work, it's kind of like, I can finally start to let people be. It's not easy yet. I'm expecting it'll get easier, but I can let people be because it's what they're doing is it's kind of a separate thing from what I'm doing.
Mm.
In other words, just like with the cutting of the onion, that to me is like, it's such a good metaphor for everything else that I'm experiencing. It's like, you said something to me I don't like. And yes, I may have to say something in response to that. That may be important, but not because I need to change you. I'm willing to feel this. I'm willing to feel what that did to me, whatever it was that happened that I didn't like, whatever the person said or whatever, getting hit in the head or whatever. I'm willing to experience it rather than bracing and flinching.
Mm.
And that's where I am with that. Just understanding now that I've been doing it for a few weeks, I'm beginning to trust that it's okay not to flinch, not to brace, not to cower.
Yeah.
Um, and I know that because the more I do it, the more I can do it.
Yes.
It's not
Yes.
happening every single time, but
No.
it's happening more and more and more where I recognize, instead of just being out of my head and, just kind of reaching for food or reaching for a YouTube video or something to just kind of get away from what's happening and just kind of numb out from what's happening, I'm willing to be with it.
Mm.
And then all this other stuff that I can't really describe starts to happen, which I do think does lead to a kind of groundedness, resilience. That experience is expanding within me, even as I continue to struggle with all the regular things that life brings to me.
Mhm.
Life isn't really that different, but I feel like
I love that.
my experience feels so different. I was also sharing with our group, it's almost like I'm visiting someone else's life sometimes.
Mm,
It feels like I'm visiting someone else's life.
yeah.
Like it just feels so different because of the way I feel. My kind of steadiness and ability to navigate and function feels different.
See, that's what's so important, because when your body changes the way it receives charge, and then we understand life is pure charge, right? The brutality, the beauty, it's all charge. So if my body has a practice of opening into charge, that literally translates into my body is able to open into life, right? And all of life, like, doesn't matter what's happening, I can open there. And that's huge, because nothing has to change around you. Your body has changed. Your body has adapted to a reality. And then I tell everyone this, ask me a question, people say like, but what about, injustice, right? Like, what about you? Yes, like, you still want to work on doing what you can to heal that. No, we don't avoid, injustice and abuse. But when your body opens into it, you're showing up to injustice in a whole new way than when you were bracing and fighting. You don't have to fight anymore. It's kind of like you're just communing with injustice. You're relating with injustice. You're learning injustice and you're responding to it. Just like you said, if someone says something to you, there might be a response, but that response isn't coming from a place of wanting to change, hurt, or do anything to them. It's just a natural rhythm coming from you that feels right, from this body that's able to expand into charge. So it's good that people know that, because some people get afraid to do work where they become so okay with everything because they think it means like complacence, but it really doesn't. It just means I'm functioning well through the stress of anything I'm doing, right? Whether I'm trying to shift something in the world, or I'm writing a book, or I'm in love with somebody, looking at myself in the mirror, like whatever it is, there's an ease that comes with it because the body is now opening instead of bracing. Does that make sense?
I think ease is a great word. And I found, even though it's the very early stages for me, I have a little more courage. So those spaces where I do need to stand up, where I would have been unwilling before because I didn't have the capacity, it's very counterintuitive, very strange, ironic. I
Yeah.
use those words so much when I describe this work because it doesn't go where you think it's going to go.
Nope.
It does not go to passivity. Passivity comes from numbness.
Yes.
And that's the surprising part. When you start to relax into being with your body and with the sensations in your body, you have a little more courage to say things that you might not have been willing to say before, do things you might not have been willing to do, ask questions that you might have been afraid to ask. And that leads you to a completely unexpected place. It doesn't lead you away from life and the world. It gives you a little bit more capacity and ability to be with everyone else because you're with yourself. That's
Mm.
something else that I've been thinking about because of our work. It's just yeah, it's really beautiful, really, really beautiful.
I'm so happy that you came on and we were willing to talk about this. And I love that what you just said, just to close it there, about there's more capacity for courage. I mean, what a beautiful thing to say. And it's totally my experience. I've never even thought of it that way. But yeah, to express and act from your integrity, it takes some serious capacity. And this work is all about capacity. It's zero passivity, actually. Passivity is how we got here, right? It's the complete opposite, but it can seem passive. Because you're not running out to change things. You're first going in to relate to things. And then from that relationship, like you said, with the self, relating to the world around you, there's more capacity to do that. again, whether you're relating to someone easy to relate to or someone difficult to relate to, you're still open to relating and you have the ability to do so. So I thank you so much for joining us and giving us your wisdom through your eyes and mind and heart of how you experience this work. And it's given me some things to consider and sit with. Trust yourself with money. I'm so interested in your book. I'll have to listen to that. Is there an audiobook or is it?
Yes, yes, I did an audio version for Audible. There's a paperback. It's self-published, and this book it's really my heart. I interestingly use a lot of somatic language in that book, even though I didn't know that's what I was doing,
Yeah, you were ready.
because it's really a book about the transformation I went through in thinking about my own identity and becoming someone who could become comfortable with having something.
Mm. Oh, I
Um,
love that. Oh, we might have to have you back on. Just talk about that. You know,
yeah, it was
that's a big
really
one.
an experience that it was when I wrote the book and self-published it, I had a really strong reaction. It was like, oh, everyone's going to know. But it was also so important for me to share the story because I felt like I had figured some things out.
Mm.
And so, like I said in the beginning, I'm always looking for trying to find my way through the dark to find a little more personal agency.
Yes.
And that's what this book is about to a great extent.
Well, I can't wait to listen to it and then maybe have you back on to talk about it because it sounds amazing. But I thank you so much for coming here, and I really appreciate the time. And everyone listening, the book is Trust Yourself with Money, Brigitt Thompson, and have a listen and see what you think. Thanks, Bridget.
Thank you, Luis.